Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to turn my volume up here. How is everyone doing today? Before we dive into questions, we'll just let folks get on. This is a live stream, so if you are here, please send me an emoji. Let me know where you are calling in from. I guess you're not really calling in from, are you? You are tuning in on your devices. Hello, hello. Where is everyone today? I've got 23 people so far. Hello from Montreal, Canada. Hello, the UK, Seattle. Got some of my team here to help me answer questions. Hello from Belgium, the Netherlands. And yeah, let me know if you are already a Smart Body, Smart Mind member. Maybe you're here wondering if you should be. Perhaps you're a 21-day member. Perhaps you've done some of my drop-in classes. Hello. Hey, Jen. Hey there from New England. Hello from Sweden. All right. And I'm just going to confirm that you guys can hear me loud and clear, correct? Hello from Poland, Ireland, New Jersey. Awesome. All right. Oh, great. Someone said I'm a 21-day member, but realized I never finished, so I just started doing it again. Good work. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. First of all, housekeeping today, which is Monday, the 22nd of September. I have to think there for a moment. It is the year 2025, I believe, and today and tomorrow, the 23rd, are the final 2 days to sign up for Smart Body, Smart Mind. Now, I know that some of you know what this is. You've been following me for a while, and maybe you're here wondering, maybe this is the season you do it. If you're new here and you're like, what is this? What is this Smart Body, Smart Mind thing? I'm not going to go into the whole origin story because I have tons of videos on this. All that information is on my website. But the short of it is this. I was in private practice for many, many years. I've been working with human beings since 1997 and in a somatic capacity since about 2004, and then deep into the physiology, trauma, early developmental trauma, pre-verbal trauma, in-utero trauma, transgenerational trauma, surgical traumas, all the traumas. I've been working with all of this more intensely since 2008. My training is vast. It is within the Feldenkrais method. It is within the work of Peter Levine, somatic experiencing. I took that to the highest degree possible, with the exception of becoming a trainer, did many, if not all of his master classes, assisted at that level for him and the faculty. And then I also studied the work of Kathy Kane and Stephen Terrell. These are two of my colleagues, also from the somatic experiencing world, but their expertise is working with pre-verbal trauma and early and developmental trauma, also known as EDT. And all of this stuff blew open my mind in terms of why humans are so unwell, generally speaking, in the world. Chronic illness, mental illness, relational issues, trouble focusing, trouble relating, abuse, violence, crime, hate, addiction, suicide, so many things that we are seeing kind of grand scale in this day and age can be traced back to early trauma. Now, it's not everything. I know there's other issues, but at the end of the day, when our system is dysregulated, it is very difficult to be kind, to be in connection, to be attuned, to be good parents, good spouses, good teachers, good healers, good helpers, good neighbors, all these things. And so when I got into this work, it really made me realize, wow, this is important. So I was in private practice for many years. And then I was realizing in my private practice, kind of in 2011, 12, that working with people one-on-one, while beautiful and lovely, and I am not knocking one-on-one work, I still receive it from time to time, it isn't enough. It isn't enough to learn the true language of our nervous system physiology and rewire it. I'm going to start with an analogy, and then I'm going to get into some questions. So have a listen here. I know the chat's going really fast, but I want you all to really hear this. All of you, I'm assuming, are adults. Maybe some of you are young adults, but my sense is everybody here is 20 plus, probably more so in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and maybe into our 70s. We have students in SBSM who range from 20s to the 80s. So this work is not just for a certain age category. It's not just for women, although women tend to dominate our platforms, but there are more men coming on board, which is wonderful. It was not enough to just see people one-on-one. And the reason why is our physiology, our nervous system physiology, it takes time to develop it. When we are born from our mothers, because we all were at some point, we were not fully developed. If we came full term, yes, our digestion might work. Our capacity to sleep and wake, that works. Of course, our heart works, our respiration, our breathing, but our immune system isn't fully working. Our ability to self-regulate, our temperature, and our emotions is not there. Of course, we cannot speak, we cannot walk, we can't roll over, we can't ask for help. We are incredibly vulnerable as infants. When human infants are super vulnerable, super different to animals in the wild, mammals specifically. They come out of mama bear and they're kind of able to move around a little bit, especially deer, etc. These animals pop up onto their 2 feet and off they go. We're not like that. Our apprenticeship takes a lot longer. And because of that, the likelihood of something going wrong in that development is quite high, especially because of our culture and our society and child rearing practices that, in my opinion, have become quite, we could say, even barbaric and very old school. And a lot of this stuff we are shifting out of slowly. So because of this, because of the fact that we might not get a good start at regulating our nervous system when we are young, and this doesn't have to be just abuse, just society can put us into a state of not being authentic, not being ourselves, not being able to express. And then this comes at a cost because it actually dampens our life force energy. It hinders our capacity to be truly expressive. And also, when we do have a hurt, a trauma, we sometimes suppress the healing response. We don't know how to let out emotion, how to shake, how to cry, how to grieve. When we should be resting, we have to get up and go to work the next day, or if we have to get up and go to school. And all these little things over time, over decades, over our apprenticeship as humans, young humans into adulthood, we start to kind of harden. I'll say that one more time. We kind of start to harden our essence, our vitality. Many of my students will say, when they come to this work, they don't really know who they are. They don't know how to feel themselves accurately. They don't know how to connect with the environment at all. For some are either hypervigilant or hypovigilant. There's no connection. There's no life in the body. And we want to change that. So that's exactly what we do in Smart Body, Smart Mind. It is different from my 21-day nervous system tune-up course. I see some of you are on that right now. There's no need to finish the 21-day course in order to go into SBSM. And the reason why is everything in 21 days, for the most part, is in Smart Body, Smart Mind. I developed Smart Body, Smart Mind first. And it is comprised of many practices that connect to my practices in somatic experiencing, Feldenkrais, and early trauma work. So I'm going to get here into the questions. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go to the submitted ones first. And then as we get into chat, I'll see what else we have to answer. Okay. So the first question here is, I was wondering if SBSM also helps with showing up for a new online business. like for people who have a calling like myself, but are very reticent to put themselves out there online. And then the next question is, is it also good for people who have Crohn's for decades, but not necessarily had the type of severe trauma from early childhood? So yes, I'm going to read something actually. So bear with me here, you guys. I'm going to go to my email. You won't be able to see my email. I'm going to read something. So not too long ago, I did an interview with one of our SBSM alumni. Her name is Bernadet. We can pop up her interview here in the chat. Bernadet, SBSM alumni. She is in her mid-50s, I believe. So a bit older than me. She graduated high school in 1997. I graduated in 1993. When I talked to her over a year and a half ago, she was still working on her health. She was still working on symptoms, migraine headaches, chronic fear, just dysregulation in general. So I'm going to answer this question kind of dual here. She had dysregulation. Her dysregulation was causing symptoms. Crohn's, autoimmune, migraine headaches, severe PMS, severe anxiety disorders, depression, autoimmune, might have already said that. Anything that involves the core visceral organs of the body and our systems, even our cardiovascular system being off. This is where POTS comes in. This is where low blood pressure comes in. This is where Raynaud's and poor circulation comes in. People who are always cold, even hyper sweating. So someone who's always trying to cool their body off. All of this stuff is connected to the functioning of something called the autonomic nervous system. And we want to have good health between our parasympathetic systems and our sympathetic nervous system. It's more complex than that, but for today, I'm going to keep it simple because this is what we teach and dive into in SBSM. But I'll add in these little bits as we go along. So this student of ours had these problems with her health: chronic fear, migraine headaches, all the things. She did have early trauma. She did have quite severe trauma, if memory serves. So she wrote me an email at the end of August, and she says, I'm reading this and I have permission to share this. She says, "I did it, Irene, exclamation mark. I completed my bachelor's degree in elementary education. I graduated from high school in 1987, and I have tried over the past 38 years to complete it. This was only possible because of all of the nervous system work I have been doing the past 5 years with you. I am so grateful to you and incredibly relieved to accomplish my dream. Keep doing what you're doing because it is truly changing lives, Bernadet." And then I can't show you this, but if you are on my email list, you'll get this tomorrow. We'll send this out tomorrow. She sent me a fun picture of herself in her, what is it called, cap and gown, graduating at the ripe age of mid-50s, late 50s from this degree. Now, I share this to go with this question that this person had regarding business and wanting to start a business, a dream. Maybe you want to become a teacher like Bernadet. Maybe you want to go back to school for a trade. Maybe you want to become a nurse. All the things that we do for vocation, they require us to have a brain that's fairly sharp and alert. And a lot of people like Bernadet here they don't get through their goals because they can't think, they can't study, they can't retain memory. The thought of showing up to a classroom or studying or taking a test is terrifying. And she did say to me after the fact, I was a bit nervous when I was taking the test. I'm like, well, of course you were. It's a test, right? There's going to be some positive stress. But she originally wanted to be a teacher when she was in her 20s. She thought that would never happen. Now it has happened. So to go back to this question of, will this help? Will this help with showing up, putting myself out there? It absolutely can. You have to do the work. Just purchasing SBSM and giving me, the investment, the tuition isn't going to just miraculously change. You have got to do the work. As you recall in this email, she's been doing this work for 5 years. Now, this isn't to scare anyone. It's just the reality of rebuilding our nervous system over time. Just like a child, I'll go back to my infant example, doesn't come out of mama walking, talking, and making a grilled cheese sandwich. You have to teach that little human and be with it and attune and help them develop self-regulation and all the things. And then eventually they are a full functioning human, but it takes time, right? We take a long time to develop as humans. Sometimes we don't even get there because we don't have a good start. So I just love the story because yes, we can find new things and do things that we didn't think were possible when we have regulation. It is our birthright. It's how we are supposed to be. But again, because of everything in society and all the things, even if we were born in a hospital, right, and our birth was medicalized, which is the case for myself and probably most of the people here, right now it's just becoming more en vogue having at birth home births and not cutting the umbilical cord right away and making sure the mother has the baby on her skin, latching, breastfeeding, development in a way that's slow and really honors the child. There is so much that happens in the course of us coming out and being connected with the outside world that throws us off good, solid regulation and development. This is why we call it early and developmental trauma. It doesn't have to be severe abuse. It doesn't have to be massive surgical intervention when we're 2 weeks old. It can just be the way society has brought us into the world. I could talk for hours on this. There's the school system, of course. There is the way we are tested. There's the way we are put on boxes. This is the gifted students, and these are the non-gifted students, and these are the ones with this and this and this. Now, of course, we're all nuanced, but we're actually more similar than we realize. And our creativity and our passion and our uniqueness becomes really clear when we have regulation on board. So many people, from what I know, from my experience living here on this planet for nearly 50 years, is so many people don't find their true authentic self. And I know that's kind of a cliche concept these days, find your authentic self. What is your soul purpose? But it's true. So, and then the final second question to hear was Crohn's. Yeah, Crohn's is essentially irritable bowel. It is all simplified. It's the digestion not working properly. Irritation, inflammation, poor digestion of food. I'll put in here chronic constipation, chronic diarrhea, or a bit of both. When the intestines are off, that shows deep dysregulation within the nervous system. And we do not have to have had severe trauma. We don't have to have had severe trauma to have these debilitating conditions. It can go back to, as I said, just this general misattunement from the beginning in our lives. Just the little bits of toxic shame that were dosed out throughout our elementary school years, our teenage years. It's very important to understand that you don't have to have had severe abuse to have these conditions. And this connects really nicely. This question is from Patty. It connects really nicely about your shyness or being reticent to put yourself out there. Right? This comes back to what I call, and our colleagues would call, healthy life force energy, healthy aggression. Believe it or not, that healthy aggression, a healthy anger response, gives us vitality. And that vitality, that vital force, when we don't have that, typically there's these chronic conditions, and then it also influences our abilities to show up and do the work we're supposed to do. So I took a little longer to answer that question, mainly because it's an all-encompassing, beautiful question. So thanks for asking it, Patty, to really show how the nervous system connects to our health, and our well-being, and how the nervous system connects to our creativity and how we work and how we show up. I will say that most of the stories I hear connect to healing the body, healing chronic conditions, healing anxiety, what we might call mental disorders, for example. I've done so many talks with my students on them shifting out of what would be considered ADD or ADHD, or being highly sensitive. We want to have sensitivity. We want to have attunement to energy, but we don't want it just to dysregulate us to the point where we can't function and we're being bombarded with all the things that are around us. That's not good either, right? But we also don't want to be turned off and disconnected from the stuff that is out there in the world. Okay, great questions. I'm just going to check in the chat here. Let me have a little bit of something to drink. Thanks for all your comments, everyone. Okay. The other thing I'm going to say, I'm going to do one teaching point because this might help serve other questions that are going to come in. Again, for those brand new here and you're like, what the heck is the nervous system? It's important to understand our nervous system isn't just one system. There's many of them. We have a central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. So brain, spinal cord, that's the central. And then there's the peripheral nervous system. Just means coming out of the brain and the spinal cord. So the cranial nerves that come out of the brain, they travel. Many of you, I think, have probably heard of the vagus nerve. It's quite popular these days. It gets a lot of press, and it's important, but it's not the only thing that's important. But it comes out of the brain and it travels through the face, the throat, the heart, the lungs, the digestion, all the way down to the root of our body. The other part of the peripheral nervous system is the muscles, the senses. As I move my hands, as I take this drink here and take a sip, that happens because of my peripheral nervous system. I feel that this glass is cool, it's safe to touch, I feel the weight of it, I adjust my body, I adjust my posture, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at you. All of this is occurring. Obviously, our brain is helping out a big deal, and our spinal cord, but the peripheral nervous system allows this to be finessed. It allows it to be differentiated. It allows us to do all the things that humans do that are complex. And so what's very important to understand is that this peripheral nervous system contains the autonomic nervous system as well, right? So the autonomic nervous system governs two things. So listen up, this is very important. I know the chat's going really heavy and fast, but I want to make sure you don't miss this. So the peripheral nervous system, sensory motor, that's what I teach you in SBSM, movement, about sensation and improving our motor capacity. And I should say, the peripheral nervous system also connects and creates the autonomic nervous system. And that autonomic nervous system governs fight, flight, freeze, and what we would call collapse or shutdown. So these are all the various sympathetic and parasympathetic branches. We need those for survival. We need those to get up and go if there's a threat. We need those to connect when there's a threat and try to de-escalate the threat. We need those if we go into shock because there's a severe accident or we hear something really intense and we can't handle the news. We go into survival, okay? But the other thing this autonomic nervous system also does, again, this is under the peripheral nervous system, it governs our digestion, our heart rate, our respiration, our immune function, our gut, our reproductive, our hormones, our endocrine, all of these things. But the thing is if our system is constantly under threat, and not just real threat, but perceived threat or old threat that is still in the system, this is what stored survival stress is. Our organ systems don't get what they need. Our organ systems don't get the repair. They don't get the recovery. because we're constantly worrying about, quote unquote, the burning down building in our system that is survival physiology, saying there is a danger, there is a problem, we're under threat, or we got to shut down and collapse. So all that stuff is super duper important to understand as I get into some of these questions. All right. Okay. So just 1 minute, you guys. I got to just, there's some noise coming out of my room here. So I got to just turn it off just a second. I'll be back. Okay, thanks everyone. Not sure what was going on in there. Okay, so next question from, I hope I get this right, Cleona. So she asks, I'd like to ask the question regarding the support this will give to people who are neurodiverse, or we might say neurodivergent. So this is a great question. So first of all, tons of our alumni and students would classify themselves as neurodiverse or neurodivergent. So yes, this supports you because we're working with the nervous system. And the other thing that's really important to understand is we're working at titrating this work. We're going slow. You are choosing your own pace. Nowhere in SBSM do I say you got to get that lesson done today. Or if you don't get this done by Friday, you fail. This is kind of the way in which many of us were brought up, myself included, in an education system where they're trying to push us through all in a very similar path. For some people that works, for other people it doesn't. For me, it didn't work until I had to, because I wanted to go to university, and then I had to really figure out how to study differently. I had to figure out how to show up differently, and I had to do a lot, but I got there. Whereas some of my classmates were just naturally able to go through the system in the way that they were. I don't even know what it is, right? So maybe that's neurodivergent, maybe it isn't, but I come back to what we do know, and that is we have found a strong correlation with unresolved trauma and what we might call neurodivergent expressions. Some people will experience trauma because of what we might call neurodivergence. Some might find that as they heal their early trauma and developmental trauma and they grow capacity, that we might find that, wow, those pieces that I used to think were me aren't there anymore. And so this is where we have to have a very open mind and a curiosity to accepting that we might change. And you know what? We will. When we are living with some form of dysregulation, stored trauma, our system is working kind of overtime, right? It might sense the external world as threatening. It might even experience the internal world as threatening. And so as we start to take these threats out and we start to grow capacity and we start to really see and feel ourselves and who we truly are, things shift, things really change. And so I would say that in general, everyone is different. We know that. And we also have a lot of similarities, and our nervous systems are similar. And the other day I was in another Q&A call and someone asked, is there a difference between the male and the female nervous system? And while our hormones are different, our structure is different, obviously our chromosomes are different, and all the things that do make us different, our nervous system, our autonomic system, our vagus nerve, how our survival mechanisms work and act or shut down, they're all the same. So I like to keep things very neutral and be like, okay, let's just work with your physiology. Let's work with your somatic system and see what happens. And yeah, there's a lot of our students who would consider themselves neurodiverse. Some don't, some do. And we just kind of go together in a group and we learn and we practice and we ask questions. And for a lot of people, it shifts their traumas heal, and they become more regulated. And then how a person sees themselves, it is up for them, or up to them, I should say, to choose how they then see themselves in the world. And inevitably, something often changes. All right. How can you create, so this is another question from Anonymous, how can you create safety or something to fill other coping strategies before you have regulation and safety on board? I think I understand what you're asking here. So one of the things, I'll start by saying this, one of the things that's often thought of, and I would say that this is not accurate, is that we have to get safe. And once we get safe, then we will heal. And it doesn't quite work that way. Safety takes, for those of us, I'll preface this by saying, for those of us who grew up with a lot of early trauma, a lot of fear in our system, a lot of situations where the world around us was dangerous and unpredictable, that's one way of putting it, we have to have a bit of a protection around us. Some of us, we shut down, or some of us become hypervigilant. It would be the difference between someone who's very functionally frozen and stoic and just, I can do anything energy, it's often type A, versus someone who is more collapsed and more listless, despondent. We might say this is more of a depressive affect and physiology, right? Kind of like, I've just given up, I'm in collapse. So those are sort of two extremes, and of course there's nuance in them. So when we've had this kind of upbringing, nothing feels safe. Nothing feels safe. Sorry guys, I got hair in my eye. Nothing feels safe. And so we won't just go one day being unsafe and then the next day we're safe all of a sudden. It takes time. We need to build layers. So how do we move forward with coping strategies before we get to this? We start to use our strategies. I like to call them resources. So I like taking that word coping out of it and say we want to find positive resources that help grow our ability to be in the present moment. But rather than just using one of these resources, aka a coping strategy, just willy-nilly and not thinking about it, we would use that thing. Maybe it's touch, maybe it's a fuzzy blanket, maybe it is even something that's not that great for us. But what we do is we sense how it affects us internally. But we also learn how to connect to the ground, to the world around us, and we sense the shifts and changes as we use those strategies. Now, the other thing is, again, this is just my experience, just using coping and management strategies without anything extra to guide us into our physiology is usually not enough. So one could say that Smart Body, Smart Mind is a giant resource of exercises, education, tools, support, insight, practices, because there's a ton of practices in SBSM, 36 to be exact, that teach you how to grow what we would call capacity and foundation and restore safety, because we're working directly with our organs. So you learn how to work with your organ systems, specifically the ones that go on alert when there is unsafety around. These are often the kidneys and adrenals, the brainstem, the gut, the heart area, and the layers of the body, such as the skin, the fascia, the muscle, and the bone, believe it or not. You're also learning how to work with the movement and the skeleton of the body. This is where my experience in the Feldenkrais method comes in, and that you're waking up your internal core. You're waking up the connections between your skeletal structure, the environment, your sensations, your organ systems, your capacity to orient and see the world around you. You're doing all of this, and all of this is exactly what we wanted a little infant to do when they were young. Anybody here has raised a child, they know that this little human that you have needs a lot of things, but in the end of the day, it's kind of simple. they need connection, they need attunement, they need food, of course, they need temperature help, regulation, clothing when they're cold, loosening clothing when they're too warm. They need play, they need movement, they need to feel safe, they need to explore and be in different temperatures and environments. All of this creates a human to be healthy and regulated and robust and vital. So essentially what's happening in SBSM is we're not mimicking that. We're not going back in time, but we're offering the system what it maybe never got from the start. So back to this question, how do we create safety when we don't have it on board? This is how we do it. I've seen safety become absolutely 100% real in my students who have come into the program with terror in their eyes, hypervigilance, collapse, shutdown, chronic conditions. Many of our students will say that they started this work when they were bedridden. We have true stories. They started in their bed with their device, with their laptop, with their iPad, and they just did little bits of the work. And slowly but surely over time and consistently, they got out of that bedridden, disabled way of living. And it's wonderful. So again, if you haven't listened to some of our stories, I really recommend you do. There's a beautiful video that my team and I just created. It's about 13 minutes long. It's actually here on YouTube. You can post it in the chat. And it's about 31 of our students talking about their experience with SBSM. And one of the things that is very clear and consistent through all of their stories, everybody kind of was at their rock bottom. And even some people will say, I didn't know if this was going to work. I gave it a shot. I had nothing to lose, and it worked. Now, they also have said and say over and over again, you got to do the work. It doesn't do the work for you. You have to engage actively. So different than going to a body worker and being moved, being, manipulated with your tissues and such. You're not getting a pill. You're not getting a quick fix. You have to do the work. All right. Next question from Brian. What are the prerequisites for joining the program? Does one have to go through withdrawal first? So based on your question here, Brian, it sounds like you might be in the midst of being addicted to either pharmaceuticals or potentially some form of substance like alcohol, nicotine, or some other form of hard narcotic. So we like to say this, because I've seen people, and I know folks who've gone into SBSM when they have been on, say, pharmaceutical meds, namely SSRIs, benzodiazepines. Adderall is another one, which is a stimulant. And then others who have been addicted to, say, alcohol, other forms of drugs. The key is this. The key is that you are doing other things to support your body. What that is, you have to figure that out. That might be nutritional support. That might be working with a functional medicine doctor, a naturopath, an acupuncturist, a support group, AA, NA, something where you have a little bit extra support, because withdrawal is a real thing. What I have found through working with my students, and I have one senior student who has worked in drug and rehab treatment facilities, like full-on facilities where where people are locked in and they can't get away. She has said time and time again that, gosh, these people, those who are trying to get off of these drugs, they need the nervous system work. Because what is driving often addiction and the need for something to soothe the system or stimulate the system is this lack of regulation. But this is where the word titration and going small and slow, knowing what your positive resources are, or being open to finding positive resources that aren't the addiction, that they come in. I personally have not experienced addiction in my life. My husband has. Seth has talked about this in the past. So if he was here, what I know he would say is, you don't want to just rip the Band-Aid off and go cold turkey. We don't typically recommend that. And of course, I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't offer you those pieces. None of us are. But what I can say is that you don't want to replace, you don't want to just rip that off, because the system needs it to stay, in this case, regulated. Now, while it's not regulation in the way we want it, there is a homeostasis, right, happening in one system. And we want to make sure that that homeostasis doesn't get abruptly shifted so quick. And we know this. We know this when someone goes through any type of quick fix, or not quick fix, cold turkey withdrawal. It is intense, because it isn't just the biochemistry that's changing. It is the organ systems, the vasculature, the respiration, how all of our, I'm thinking back to my days of cellular biochemistry, every single cell in our body has pumps that pump in and out nutrients, micronutrients, calcium, potassium, magnesium, all these things. And if I think of pharmaceutical meds, when we go off of those, it does shift our chemistry, because we're taking something out. So this is my long way of saying the prerequisite, in my opinion, is your desire to get better. The other prerequisite is having a pact with yourself that you are going to go slow and listen to your body and not be a hero and not push, and also ask our team for support. That would be my suggestion. I've also, if I think about my private practice, I've worked with people who have been on pharmaceutical meds. And what typically we do, back then at least, is we would work with the trauma, we would work with the person, the physiology, restoring their connection to self, their connection to the environment. As that happens, traumas move out. And then what they find is that they need to readjust their meds. So then they have to work with their medical doctor to do that. And I've successfully gotten people off of medication, not because I'm telling them to stop or start or taper, but they can sense a shift in their system. And then the doctor's like, oh yeah, you need less of this. And so this is where I think a joint approach is very important. Okay, next question. So this is from Hunter. So, hey, Irene, hello. So working with dissociation is your question. I have an ongoing problem where I have a strong fear of relaxing in my body, and relaxation therapies make it worse. What might be a good strategy? So I'll speak to why this can happen. I can't say this exactly for you, but this is a common thing that I hear. So back to what I was saying earlier, if we grew up with a lot of stress around us, we can become that little kid that dissociates, that shuts down, that tunes out the world, right? But under that, Hunter, is this little fire in us, this little tiger. This is why Peter called his first book Waking the Tiger, that knows that there's danger out there. Just some examples: mom and dad are fighting. I'm living in a war zone. The streets aren't safe. I was born under extreme duress. This is a common one. This would be early developmental trauma. Again, school systems, all the things that would make us have a hardened shell, but also dissociate. So then we have this thing where someone says, hey, you should just relax. Just chill out, take a chill pill, go to a beach, listen to some meditation, listen to some soft waves. And the moment that person tries to do this, I'm using a more general concept here, there's like this alarm that says, do not relax. Are you insane? If you relax, you might die. You won't be able to protect. So this is where our nervous system physiology is really interesting, because we might look dissociated, cool as a cucumber, not hypervigilant, not snapping at people. My sense is you're a good person, kind, you wouldn't hurt a flea or a fly. But under, there's these old things that are protecting your core, that are protecting your livelihood, your authenticity. And so this actually goes back to an article I wrote, almost 10 years ago, titled Why I Believe the Mindfulness Bubble Will Burst. Worth maybe reading. It's longer, it's like an essay. But in that, I talk about how just doing spiritual work and calming work and meditative work, while is a nice idea, when we still have dysregulation in our system, it can backfire. And so this is what I think is potentially happening with yourself, is you're trying to relax the body, but you first have to work with getting these survival stresses out. Because the body can't relax if it feels under threat. Now, the other thing is you might be like, well, I don't feel a threat. I don't feel like there's a danger around me. Then this is perhaps a sign that you have been living in what's called functional freeze. There's zero shame to it. I was in functional freeze for the good portion of my life. I would say close to 42 years of my life. True story. I'm going to be 50 soon. And it wasn't until about 10 or so years ago that I started to unravel this functional freeze. And it took time because my system was so armored and so competent and stoic that it took a while to get through that shell. So when you ask what might be a good strategy, there isn't one strategy, because this is probably a result of many years, Hunter, of coping and managing and shoving stuff under the rug, as we might say, putting stuff in the closet. And so again, I'm speaking in service to my program and course, Smart Body, Smart Mind. The strategy that we would teach you would be to first really understand the physiology, and I've just given you a little bit of that. But then the practices that I teach are not about relaxation. They're not about, nowhere once do I say, I need you to take a deep breath and relax. I never say it. I do help through some breathing lessons in the course. They're called neurosensory exercises, where we're learning how to move air into different parts of the rib cage, into different parts of the pelvis, lungs, ribs, etc., shoulders, so that we can gently open and expand the core and the trunk. And the reason why that's important in a case like yourself is, again, let's just assume there was something that made you have to armor and be stoic and strong and dissociate. Chances are this tissue around your organs, the bones, the skin, the fascia, it's one of two things. It's going to be very hard and rigid and stiff, or it's going to be very doughy and collapsed with no tone. And people typically are one of the two when they've had a lot of stored trauma. And so we want to work, for those that are very tight and inflexible and rigid, at softening and opening up that tissue, those organ systems. That's, again, what is taught in SBSM. For those that have more doughy, non-vital skin and muscles, we actually do the work to improve the life force energy through the tissue. So I hope this answers this question. It is definitely all too common, I would say. So you're not alone. This is a very common thing in the West. I would also say that good for you for naming this, because a lot of folks will go into these relaxation therapies and body somatic techniques, and they'll sense the body not wanting to do it. They'll sense the fear. And then what happens? They instantly override that fear and pop it back into the system. Usually not consciously. It just happens as an automatic switch. And it's, again, another layer of protecting those fear responses. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jen, for getting to the questions here. Next question is from Hafsa. So I'm a student in your 21-day course from India. While I'm doing your exercises on my lower back, I realize my whole body is in constriction. Oh, I just talked about this. I have autoimmune and generalized anxiety disorder. So I don't know what the question is here, but I'll just speak generally to what you're saying here, Hafsa. Thanks for your statement. What I just said to the person above here, Hunter, regarding dissociation and relaxation therapies, making his system not calm down, this is it. So again, when we've had this upbringing, and we've actually had quite a few students from your country, your culture, and I will say, yeah, your culture can be very strict and very mean to little people, right? And this isn't, not that this isn't the case in other cultures, but there is a special flair from those. And I have a lot of friends who are here in Canada, we would call East Indian, and they come with a lot of trauma. And it isn't necessarily overt physical abuse. A lot of it is verbal. A lot of it is having to perform and be perfect. And I get it. I get why that's there. But what happens with a little person is that, again, their system starts to get scared. It starts to armor. It starts to constrict. And then, as you say, you're working through the exercises in 21 days where we work with the pelvis and the lower back and the spine, and there's constriction. That makes complete sense. If the body is in a let's just give this as a general, you're in a family system, you're young, you know that you can't run away. Some kids try, but it often doesn't work. So you have to stay in this abusive, toxic family system. So your body is wanting to flee and get the heck out, like seriously, but your system won't let you. So there's this tug of war. And then this is where we have the sympathetic fight, flight on, but also the freeze on. And this is what creates constriction. Now, it makes textbook sense. You say you have autoimmune and generalized anxiety disorder. These are common syndromes, which are clusters of symptoms that occur when, I just said it, the fight and flight is on and the freeze is on at the same time for a long period of time. And what happens is those survival responses, when both on, it's like having the gas on and the brake on at the same time, the system finally goes, I can't anymore. And if you can recall, a little while ago, I mentioned when our system is in constant survival, we can't repair. So this is where autoimmune comes in. We can't take the body out of inflammation, or we can't repair the gut. We can't enhance the immune system. Things are kind of upside down as opposed to flowing in the right direction. It's the same with the digestive issues that someone else had asked. Rather than all the valves, I'm using my hands to describe this, flowing in this nice, we would call it sinusoidal wave, up and down, up and down. This is how our body needs flow. It's like this. It's like erratic. It's like one is trying to open and the other is closed, and then this opens and then this closes. And then we have acid reflux that comes up to our mouth, and then we have bowels that loosen and let go or constrict. And then another element sometimes is the bladder. We call this cystitis. Just going to throw that word out there because sometimes people don't understand that that is connected to dysregulation. So there's this kind of chaos within our organ systems as a result of the fight, flight, freeze, and then for some of us, collapse being on for a very long period of time. And then general anxiety disorder, this is that. Again, this is that little system that was hypervigilant and having to look for danger constantly. And so we become generalized in our anxiety. It's just our default. But the thing is over time, that breaks us down. So that is a breakdown of how early childhood stress, prolonged early childhood stress, it could be from, again, abuse. It could be from some kind of medical condition when we're young, surgery, could be just from a culture that is repressive and not allowing us to be who we need to be. All of this can contribute to exactly what you're talking about here. So I hope that answers not just your thoughts or questions around that, Hafsa, but any other people here. And I know this is so common in our world, so that should have helped a few people here. Okay, let me just have a little more water. What are your thoughts on the importance of nutrition related to healing our body and chronic issues? I tried Carnivore, it seemed to be working so well for a lot of people, but not for me. And digestive issues are my main problem. So this is from Intuitive Anma. So I just spoke about digestive issues. So everything I just said applies to yourself. In terms of nutrition, I mean, it is important. I know through colleagues and students who have tried Carnivore, this is when we eat primarily animal product. Typically it is beef. A lot of times people will find that their autoimmune conditions improve. Now, is it the meat? And I'm not against carnivore. It has helped a lot of people that I know. But is it the fact that you are taking out other foods that are inflammatory? Typically when someone goes onto a restrictive diet, and it doesn't have to be carnivore, it could be a vegan diet, a vegetarian diet, or just a whole foods diet. You're taking out processed sugar, refined sugar, anything packaged, anything seed oil, because all packaged foods typically need seed oils and they're very inflammatory on the system. You're probably taking out, say, alcohol, irritants, stimulants. I'm not against caffeine. Everybody's different. But usually we're lessening the stuff that we would call irritating to the gut and to the system. So that's one thing. But I would say nutrition is essential, but I've worked with so many people in the past who have been impeccable with their nutrition and their digestion is still completely wonky. And so I then say you got to look a little deeper at the nervous system, its health. I know parasites have been a big topic recently, as has low stomach acid. I've heard recently that can contribute to what's called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But again, why is the stomach acid low? I might surmise the fact that it's because the nervous system isn't properly regulating that digestive tract. And so, yes, we've had a lot of folks who have found their proper nutrition diet, their proper needs. As they become regulated, they start to sense and follow their real impulse, as opposed to what the outside world is telling us we should eat. We're incredibly diverse. It also depends on our culture. Some of us are born meat eaters. Some of us have body types that are more herbivorous. Some people can do super well with dairy and such. Everyone's a bit different. But what I have seen is when we're healthy, we can actually eat a lot of different diverse whole foods. So I hope that answers that question. All right. So Angelic asks, what do you mean when you say, so I mentioned we came full term. So when I mean full term, typically we would say for humans at least 9 months, give or take a week or two, is full term. When we come full term, our heart is working, our lungs are working, our bladder is working. We have full functioning limbs. We're just not differentiated and we don't have the ability to regulate ourselves, but we can latch, we can suckle, we can digest mother's milk and poop it out. We can pee, all these things. So that's what I mean full term. Now you say, I did not come full term. You were born at 23 weeks of pregnancy. So you would be technically considered premature. Is this work more difficult or impossible if you were so premature? Absolutely not. So you're here, you're alive, you're typing, your English is perfect. Yeah. So the difference between, I'll restart this. Because you're here and you're functioning, and I don't know if you have other, we would say ailments or nervous system issues, you're here. So I wouldn't say that it's difficult I wouldn't say that it's impossible, because it's not. What will maybe come up, and I don't know for sure, is that early trauma of not having the connection, because chances are you were in an incubator. Most likely, I'm not on it with my gestational weeks, probably a respirator. So you are having help with breathing because your lungs aren't fully developed. So chances are you had to be poked and prodded in isolation from your mother, in isolation from a consistent, safe adult. You probably had, different nurses coming up, hopefully in full support of your little system, staying well and healthy, but it's still taxing. It's still a bit of a stress. So this is where going slow, going gentle is going to be super important. But this is where working with, we call them the stress organs. I mentioned them a little earlier, the kidney adrenals, the gut-brain connection, the brain stem, but also really for you, the layers of the body, the skin, the joints. We're going to work in SBSM with parts of the body called the diaphragms. And that's just not the respiratory diaphragm, but for you, this might be a really important one. It's all these layers in the body that hold space and hold energy and emotion. So we work with all of that. My husband, Seth Lyon, who some of you know, he was born preemie. I don't exactly know what week he was at when he was born, but he was in an incubator. He definitely came out. He came out faster than he should have, and I just think he didn't want to be in. He says, I just didn't want to be in that environment anymore, because his mother was under a lot of stress. And so he pushed himself out, and he's doing beautifully. Has he had to do a lot of work? Absolutely. When I met him, Seth was living with complex PTSD, severe IBS, bowel disorders, spinal structures that were incredibly painful and rigid, and he had severe social anxiety. So he was a completely different human when I met him, 15 or so years ago, and he's restructured his entire system. Safety is fully on board, gut problems pretty much gone. And so I share that with you, Angelic, because yes, we definitely can do this. It is not impossible, but it will require you taking your time and going slow and really listening to the body and what it needs. All right. Okay. All right. Questions. Let's keep going, folks. All right. Hey, Patricia. So question from you. You're in Ireland. Hello. I'm half Irish, so giving you a nod across the pond. So you would love to hear how SBSM may help insomnia, which is a huge issue for me. Yeah. So insomnia, obviously, as many of us know, is the inability to sleep. It could be that we can sleep and we wake up, or that we can't fall asleep until the wee hours of the morning. So there's lots of different ways in which this sets in. Now, before I go into the nervous system elements, it's kind of I would say my fiduciary duty to also mention some other things around insomnia that I have seen over my many years. One of them is depending on our lifestyle, we need to be active during the day. Now, I understand if we have nervous system related issues, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, we're not getting that vibrancy and that movement and vigor in our day. I think that a lot of us struggle to sleep at night because we haven't exerted ourselves physically in a healthy way, right? So this is exercise, lifting weight, being outside. So I'm going to add that in because it is important. The other is because of our intense usage of blue light. So fluorescent lights, LED lights, I've got my cell phone here, blue light that we look at night, our computer screens, our televisions. This stuff can really throw off our body's signal to create what's called melatonin so that we can go to sleep. I am not an expert in that area, but I know it is important, and I have other resources people that I've interviewed, namely Sarah Kleiner and Carrie Bennett, where I've talked about this need for getting proper circadian health on board. The other thing is being outside. So while not all of us live in tropical climates where we can get lots of beautiful sunshine on our skin, if you can, that is what helps produce melatonin at night. But we also want to get outside because that positive, we would call them photons, even if it's a cloudy day. A lot of people won't go outside if it's rainy or cloudy. We still want to go outside, even when we're just sitting on our stoop or porch. That helps us set our circadian cycles so that we are awake during the day, but then we get sleepy when it gets dark. But of course, it means having dim lights in our environment. So it really is worth it if one struggles with sleep to ensure that your evening is as dark as possible. And this is why blue blocking glasses have become so popular recently. I personally don't use them because we have a very dark environment in our home here, and we've got those old-fashioned incandescent light bulbs everywhere and candles. So that's my fiduciary duty, Patricia, to give you those elements. How SBSM may help, well, this is where we get into sort of what I've already been saying, which is survival physiology. So it reminds me of the question I answered for Hunter around feeling unable to relax. And when he said that he would try to relax, the system would mount up a fear response and oh no, you don't, don't you dare relax. And so sleep is the same way. So what happens when we go to sleep is we shift things, right? We gear down. It's quieter. There's not as much stimulus around us. We're laying usually flat, so we're more vulnerable. So all these things, when we have got stored survival stress, and what that looks like is so diverse. It could be just generalized early trauma. It could be something specific like a physical abuse, an attack, even a car accident. Or, this is where transgenerational trauma is kind of interesting, and in-utero trauma. Like if our ancestors were not safe in their homes, it could make it such that we don't feel safe when we are in a quiet space and we're not up and alert and looking around, right? We have to, when we go to sleep, we are essentially surrendering, right? We're going into kind of like an interesting near-death state. And we need to sleep, because when we go into deep, real good sleep, we are repairing our body. So it is essential that we get our sleep in check. I have had many students say, and we have this written out in testimony and such, that the sleep shifts, it changes. It typically isn't just like one day it's terrible and one day it's perfect, but people start to find that their sleep shifts. It might be such that it's a bit kind of, I'm thinking like a car that's spurting, when it needs an oil change. It's like, it doesn't go as good as it could, but then you improve things, you add things, you clean up the filter, all these things, and then the car revs nicely. Sleep is sort of in that way, and that we also might find that our sleep might improve. And this is a true story when we do this work. And then there'll be a series of weeks or even months where our sleep is a bit wonky. And that is often because we're at another layer. We've excavated another layer of often earlier childhood stress, earlier trauma, where there's a little bit more of we might call it anxiety, but it's a fear that pops up at night. So again, sleep, it's complex. It's not just one thing, it's many things. But when we have regulation on board, better regulation on board, better safety. And the other thing I'll add is when we have more regulation on board and we're more connected to our somatic system, our mind doesn't race in the same way at night. We are able to connect to our body, to the surface we're on, and that actually can sometimes be enough to push someone into being a little more tired at night and then drifting off. So I hope that answers that question. Okay. Is there a correlation? This is from, there's a fun name, Sprinkle of Whimsy. Is there a correlation between hormones and nervous system dysfunction? I've noticed many women, including myself, starting to have nervous system issues in the mid-30s, 40s. So yes and no. It depends on the system. So I actually just answered a perimenopause. Where was this? That's what it was. I was interviewed by Sarah Kleiner. I just mentioned her. She's one of my circadian rhythm experts. I did a live stream with her on her Instagram. So if we could find that, we could probably put this here for a longer version. What I have seen, so I'll start this in a different way. Everyone is a little different. So I'm going to state that, or start by saying what I'm about to say is not going to apply to everyone. But from my experiences and seeing people around me, their hormone changes that come really, some people will say mid-30s, but technically we really don't want these big swings and shifts to happen until mid-40s, 50s. But they're happening a lot earlier. My hunch, and this is just my theory, these things are happening earlier and earlier, just like we're seeing kids with more health problems and people in their 20s are having autoimmune conditions when we typically wouldn't see that into someone's 50s or 60s, is as a society, we're just a bit more or a lot more stressed. There are less chances to really disconnect and just be, right? Because of the internet, the way social media captivates us and keeps us in chaos in some ways. So we're constantly in this hamster wheel. When you add that on top of existing dysregulation and stored survival stress, you kind of have this situation where things are going to get worse a lot faster and earlier. So it's in some ways we could say we're aging ourselves. We're aging ourselves and having what should happen much later in life a lot earlier. Now, this doesn't mean this has to be the case. So again, if we come back to what I mentioned at the top a little bit about how when we have our autonomic nervous system governs fight, flight, freeze, collapse, it also governs these systems, not just circulation and digestion and immune system, but also hormone and endocrine systems. It all connects, right? Everything connects. So when the system is in survival, it's going to mess up the hormones, just like when a young woman, a teenage woman, is incredibly skinny, maybe training a ton. We see this in athletes, especially gymnasts and figure skaters, track athletes. Often those women won't get their menstrual cycles until they're into their late teens. And it's because the hormones or the brain thinks, well, it doesn't think, it knows there is not enough tissue and fat on this young woman to survive a pregnancy for 9 months if there was no food, right? And so this is why those cycles don't come. And then often what will happen, and I studied this intensively actually in university when I was studying sports nutrition, is a young girl who's say 13 or 14 has not gotten her menstrual cycle yet. She goes off for a summer break to like have fun somewhere, and boom, she gets her period. And it's because she gains a little bit more weight. She's not constantly in this athletic pursuit where calories are deficient. So I share that example as a parallel to what is potentially occurring in women who are in their 30s and 40s, is the stress levels are so high. This blue light, again, really follows Sarah and Carrie's stuff. It impacts our cascade of sex hormones and our sleep hormones and our appetite hormones and our metabolism hormones, specifically leptin. I'm not an expert on that hormone, but Sarah is. And so I think there's a few things going on. One of them is definitely dysregulation in the nervous system, definitely not having enough time to let go and emote and get this stuff out. But there's also there also is, I think, a strong environmental factor with just these screens that were around all the time. So, you know, if I think about my mother, who's still alive and in her late 80s, she's super healthy. And, you know, there's some things there, but she has no cell phone. She has no email. She doesn't know how to turn a computer on. She lives a circadian life outside in her garden, going to bed when it's dark, waking up when it's light, all these things. And so there is something simple, but it's also not simple, especially when we need to work and all those things. So I've rambled a little bit on that, but by the by, I would say, as I have heard my females talk about their premenstrual and perimenopause symptoms, one individual I'm thinking of, because I did do an interview with her, it's coming to me, Leora, we can put her interview in her. Leora and myself, we talked, I think it was last year. She actually called her, and she said this, so this isn't me taking this out of context. She called her menstrual cycle Cujo because it was so angry and so violent and so painful. And that has shifted completely with this work specifically. So all those things, diet, blue light, stress, hormones connect with the nervous system, and then making sure we're moving the stored traumas out of our systems, super important. Next question. So thanks for that question. So this is from Beautiful Humans. Isn't it counterproductive to work through a course alone as a traumatized human? Isn't a co-regulating person needed? Great question. It depends. I've actually done an article, maybe 2 articles, definitely a video on this, and an article on why online learning is actually really good for those who have had early trauma and are traumatized. Now, it's not going to be for everyone, but the reason why we have found it's not counterproductive is because you can go at a pace that suits you, and you would be surprised, or maybe you aren't, the amount of defense that has to come up into a person when they are connecting with another person, even if it's someone we like, even if it's a trusted advisor, our best friend, a therapist who we know is solid and won't harm us. If we have had early trauma where it's been a relational trauma, misattunement, attachment disorders, we have to navigate all the stuff that's occurring unconscious and subconscious, not just in our mind, but in our physiology, in our organs, when we connect with another human, even when we know that that human is there for our good and we sense enough safety to be in a room with someone. So what happens when that dynamic is there is there's all this, what's the word I'm looking for? Silent stuff going on that we will override. We won't notice that our kidneys get a little tight. We might notice that the pelvic bowl where our perineum is just slightly contracted. We might not notice that we actually cry a little bit of tears, but we don't go into the full grief of what has to be let out because we're afraid of showing that full expression. A lot of times I have seen, because I was in private practice, it would take a lot of time to build up that trust, even though the person knows I'm fine and they like the work, but the system is on alert. This is why I have actually seen more success through those who have gone through Smart Body, Smart Mind than when I was in private practice. Of course, the volume is much higher, but the stories I have heard from my students surpass anything I've heard from myself in private practice and many of my colleagues who work in private practice. So it actually, for some, is not counterproductive. There does come a point, I have found, and everyone's different, where someone might need that co-regulating person. It's like, okay, I've done enough baseline work. I've done enough work to feel inside when my body starts to get triggered, and I know when to say that's enough. And once that happens, then I think entering into co-regulation with a therapist or a body worker or whomever or a group would then be very useful. But even then, you have to really titrate those experiences as well. So it seems counterproductive. Oddly, it is not, because of the type of misattuned, we would just call this attachment disorders and traumas and early trauma that many of us have lived through. So I hope that answers that question. So Rachel has a question here. This is slightly outside of my scope, but you asked it, so I will name it and give you my thoughts. Is threatened miscarriage, so not an actual miscarriage, but threatened miscarriage, considered an in utero trauma? I would say yes, because something has occurred to cause a stress, cause something that's abrupt to the developing human within that connection of the womb, the uterine cavity, the placenta, right? Often when miscarriages occur, it can be due to a shock trauma, a fall, high stress, something that occurs where there's not enough connection with the placenta being strong and solid. And so these scares happen. Obviously, the system of the developing baby, fetus, is being put under massive duress. So they will feel a strain. They will feel a stress. Chances are the mother will also feel a massive strain if they are in an accident. That trauma and all of the chemicals she has experienced will transfer to the little one. It doesn't, just stay within her blood supply. It goes to the developing human. So yeah, I would say that there is in utero trauma there. And then again, this happens to many people. And then the question comes, do we know what to do with it afterwards? So, in this point in time currently, I would say we don't know it. People don't know enough about this, especially pediatricians, especially OBGYNs. It really is up to the human having the child or the partner or the system to say, yeah, you had that accident when you were carrying. It might be important to just, be open to getting some work done, whether it's the mother or the mother and the infant. The good news is that when you know this stuff, and let's just say we're talking from the mother's point of view, and you have your child, if you're open to this, getting this work done earlier in the game is actually super important. Now, of course, smart body, smart mind can't work with an infant, but what it can do, because I've had some students, I'm thinking about some of my senior students who have told me stories over the years where, because of their knowledge and learning in SBSM, they were able to work with their toddlers, their infants, their children, and do, in a sense, sort of play therapy or touch work with them just by holding the intention that they're safe. And when I was in private practice, that is a big part of the work, is touch, connecting, and oozing out this feeling of you are safe. It is safe. Just over and over and over again. Safety. I'm here. We got this. Yep, that was scary, but we're here. And it's just over and over again. It's sort of like when you take in an animal, a dog or a cat that's been abused, or a stray off the street, and you have no idea what happened to it. You can't just pick up that dog and hug it and expect it to be a fun little puppy dog. You've got to slowly help it see and feel that you aren't going to harm it. And so there's actually a lot that can be done when we get this knowledge on board as parents or nurses or care providers, etc. So I hope that answers that question. So this was already answered in the chat, but I just want to really reinstate this before we end for today, because we're at the top of the hour. We've been going for about 90 minutes. So Sprinkle of Whimsy asks, if you fix digestion, so if you fix your digestion, can that make your nervous system somewhat better? So it's actually a flip. While food is important, and I'm a big believer in herbs and homeopathy and micronutrients and functional medicine, and visceral work, etc., it's very clear to me through my years, and my colleagues would agree, that when we work with the nervous system, that's what improves the digestion, because that nervous system drives the autonomic functions. So when the autonomic nervous system, as I mentioned, is stuck in this fight, flight, freeze, shutdown, or some variation of those four things, it cannot upkeep the gut. The gut cannot recover and heal. The barrier of the gut doesn't strengthen at night when we sleep. This is one thought as to why leaky gut occurs. So it's actually the other way. Just like if our breath is hindered and labored, there's this thought that I do breath work, so I just worked on regulating my nervous system. Not so much the case. If we're regulated, we don't need to work on our breath. It is full and voluminous, is that a word? And it increases when we need it, and it decreases when we don't need big respiration. And it inflates in this beautiful open way, because the ribs, the organs, the tissues have suppleness and that flow I was talking about. And what has been taught, because I see it, is I need to push this respiration by deep breathing and doing all this breath work to improve my lung capacity. But it's like you're trying to push something that isn't going to open. And so a lot of force and a lot of strain occurs, because the autonomic physiology is like, what are you doing? We need to keep this shut down. It's like, okay, you can breathe really deep, but it's not going to do much. So as a therapeutic benefit, yeah, it might make you feel a little more alert. For some people, even euphoric. Some people will pass out. And that's a sign that the system cannot metabolize the high shift and the change in the CO2 and O2 ratio. So again, I share that because there's sort of there's a lot of misinformation that I have seen out there regarding, oh, this is going to help regulate the nervous system, like breath work, for example, or just doing some somatic movement. But again, if we were to take, and maybe this is what I'll end on, if we have this newborn baby, right? New little human comes out, you cannot help it learn regulation by saying to it, I need you to take some deep breaths and really work on your breath. I know that seems crazy, but of course, when a baby is crying, you can't tell it to take a deep breath and exhale slowly to calm down. It won't work. What do they need? They need connection. They need attunement. They need what they need in the moment, and it's the job of the parent or the caregiver to get to know what the signs and signals are, so that they can feed the baby, change the diaper, give it something warm, cool it down, allow it to play, allow it to say, I don't like that person. So what happens in Smart Body, Smart Mind is you are learning how to do that for yourself as an adult. Now, this, again, it isn't something that happens in the first week. For many, it doesn't even happen in the first 12 weeks. But over time, and this is why people, alumni, will say, I've come back, I've done 3 rounds, I've done 2 rounds, I've done 5 rounds. They are repeating the lessons because it takes time to learn this new language. So, very important for me to state that, because this is a very different way of learning how to be healthy. I'm not giving you this exercise when you have anxiety. Do this movement when you have pain in the back. It's not like that. You are really learning how to become your own medicine and be the master of your physiology. It is, in my experience, monumentally life-changing. And we have so many stories around this, around folks changing and shifting. If you haven't gone to the site to look at the stories, I strongly recommend you do that and check that out. Watch the videos that we have on the main registration page for SBSM. There's a lot there. I see a few people have asked about sleep. I just responded to sleep, so I'm not gonna respond again and answer that. Please go back and watch from the top. I will answer this final question from Poseidon about central sensitization syndrome. You're extremely sensitive to any small biological, chemical, or physical change in my body due to trauma. Why does this happen? Essentially, this happens because the body, I'm going to use a fancy word, it has been kindled. There's something called a kindling response. Now, it's not important to know that in a sense of what it means, but this occurs often, Poseidon, when typically this is a case of early and developmental trauma, typically, or some situation where you have been under massive threat for a prolonged period of time. And so the system has never had a chance to fully feel safe and at peace. And so it's constantly alert and hyper responsive to anything going on. Also what's going on internally, environmentally. This can change, but it's essential that one works at the autonomic nervous system level. This was the bread and butter of what some of my predecessors, namely Kathy Kane, worked with. Folks who literally had to live in glass houses, no textiles, no chemicals, no fabrics, so sensitive to everything in the world. And with time and slowly, and in her case, it was working with people one-on-one over the years, they became full functioning members of society. And I've seen this in a lot of my students. They have had what we would call hypersensitivities to chemicals, sounds. One woman I'm thinking of right now who is in Dundee, glow crafts. Maybe we can find that. And if we don't get it to you here in the chat, Poseidon, you can email support and we can send you her YouTube channel, or not YouTube, Instagram channel. This poor woman, Gloria was her name, like you, loud sounds were grating. She couldn't travel over bridges. She couldn't go out into the world. She stuck with Smart Body, Smart Mind. She used it. She did the lessons. She showed up. She learned. And these are all these things are gone. She's a fully functioning member of society. She's even started up her own crafts business. And she's not young. She's way older than me. I'm not sure how old she is. She's probably in her 50s, maybe 60s. Sorry, Gloria, if I get that wrong. But, similar to the story I started at the top of this call with Bernadet, here's someone who thought she was never going to get better, would be considered someone with complex PTSD, hypersensitivities, unable to be in life, to be around music, to be around people. And she's traveling. I just saw the other day on her Instagram, she was traveling to go to a workshop, I think in Edinburgh, to learn some things. So this stuff happens, the sensitization, it is typically early trauma, sustained, prolonged exposure, chronic stress. Often with this, it is, I'm not saying this is what happened to you, but I have seen this is where early surgery, in-utero stress, constantly being handled because we're sick as a child can really lead to this, or having parents who are incredibly unwell. And then we are in some ways mirroring their unwellness. And then we have to create a bubble and live in that bubble. And then that's where the system just is under intense strain. So that's a great question. I wanted to make sure I got to that. I'm going to end it here. I've been talking for a while. I hope this has been useful. I hope this has answered some of your questions around the work I do, the level of really detail we understand in SBSM. Jen here has been, a trooper on the chat, answering lots of questions. She's another individual that helps support SBSM through the not the training calls, but the Q&A calls with my husband Seth. She's also a moderator, and it really is a shift of learning. It's shifting how you learn. When we shift how we learn, and that's exactly what happens in SBSM, we heal. So there again, say this always, there are no magic, miraculous shifts that occur. That being said, often people will say this seems miraculous because it influences so many parts of your life, of your physiology, of your relationships, of your creativity. And we're doing it a different way. You're learning how to become your own medicine in SBSM. So again, today and tomorrow are the final 2 days of registration before we close for this year. Typically, we run twice a year. Again, we might start this again at the end of February. It hasn't been decided yet, actually. So if you are feeling an impulse, even if there's a little fear, that's okay. If there's an impulse like, yeah, I want to try this, I want to do this, now is the time to get in. If you do have some follow-up questions that I just didn't happen to get around the course logistics, you can email support. My team is there answering your questions today and tomorrow and into Wednesday. Usually we get some last minute people coming in, but if you know you want to join, you have other questions, get those questions in now. It's just a support@ireneline.com, or you can also access that on my website. And there's real people there. So Susan will be there perhaps, Crystal, maybe Sophia answering questions, and Leah. They're real humans. They're not AI bots, which I think is important these days. So ask away. They're happy to answer your questions. And maybe we will see you on Thursday, which is when our orientation call is at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Also everything when we are in SBSM, all of the calls are recorded. So if you can't make something live, you get all the recordings, more than you need. Audio, video gallery, and transcripts. Everything that goes down live, you can take in after the fact. And that also means you can take your time going through the live offerings. Okay, I said I would stop a while ago. I'm going to stop now. Thank you, everyone, so much. The chat has been hopping, I think. So thank you for your typing and your questions and your attention. Thanks to all my students who are already doing this work, who have shown up and are just here to listen and contribute your energy and your regulation. Thank you. And for all of those who are new to SBSM, welcome. And we will see you maybe on Thursday. Bye, everyone.